What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show, the podcast. We have a special guest this week, and we're going to be able to talk about something in MLB The Show that I admittedly am not capable of talking about in as much depth as our new friend here. So, welcome to the show, Scrawny Slugger, to talk franchise mode, baby. What's going on?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you for having me on. First and foremost, I've been kind of following the show, over the past couple months, I guess, as I've been recording pretty late hours on franchise mode, which I'm also excited to talk about today. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. Um, you are someone who is at least relatively new to my radar, which is super cool. It's cool to meet new people and see new people popping off. So before we start, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, about your content journey. Like, just kind of put it all out there.
Hey, so I guess first and foremost, this is kind of an elevator pitch. So I guess starting at the beginning, my name's Scrawny Slugger. I make mostly offline, actually entirely offline content, franchise and road to the show. I'm really passionate about building teams. I've done some custom team franchise rebuilds over the years and try to make my content as immersive as possible. And sometimes they're 3 hours long of just rebuilding teams on franchise mode. So I'm super passionate about this game mode, team building, and good storytelling associated with franchise mode. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out my channel, and you can be a part of the Scrawny Slugger community. I've been doing this since 2023, and I've really been blown away by the support within the community, and look forward to a great future here on YouTube.
We usually save the channel plugs until the end, but by all means do it now when we're on topic. Where can people find you? I know how retention works, so maybe they'll find you at the front of the video. Where can they find you?
Well, you can go to youtube.com/scrawny slugger on YouTube, and you'll find me there. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram as well, and also recently on X. So
There
you
you
can
go.
find me pretty much all the platforms that you'd like. Thanks for allowing me to do a little self plug there.
No, of course, of course. You can self plug on my channels if you're not a stupid idiot, and you are not one. So it makes it nice and easy. So let's do franchise mode. Let's talk. As I said right before we started recording, franchise for me has never been something enough to grab me. I'm a Diamond Dynasty guy. I like head to head. I like multiplayer. I will say MLB The Show 25's offline content this year so far has blown every expectation away. It's been incredible. Diamond Quest is the best new thing they've ever added ever. Um, Offline is playing better than online. That's a separate conversation for another day. Um, the big franchise changes had to do with off-season stuff, free agency specifically. And I truly think that's important, and I want to talk all about your opinions on it. I still think franchise lacks a lot of the depth it needs in like the nitty-gritty areas. But before we talk about the negative, let's talk about the positive. What has your experience been like so far with the revamped free agency and things like that?
Wow, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I do agree with you that there's certainly still a lot of negatives, and I've written a bit about that. But I want to start with the positives as well because I love the new free agent system, and I think there's a lot of people that will complain just because it's a little more difficult having
Mm-hmm.
the ability to only sign three players at a time. But I believe that this also provides a level of realism because in the real managerial world, you're not able to sign 12 players at a time or offer that many contracts on the table. Usually you have limited resources. You need to
Mm-hmm.
know which players are going to sign where. So I think the fact that we have a system where not only do players need to be interested to sign with you, but there's a limited number of slots to actually sign them. And as the weeks kind of go on, you're going to be building interest. And if you just shit in their face with a low offer, they're not going to be interested in signing, just like in real life. They'll even kind of sass at you if you offer them a low ball deal. So I really like that immersion and that realism. And as a creator, it gives me a lot of means to tell a story about, oh, Kyle Tucker, we offered him, $25 million and he just took it as the biggest insult in the world. And now he doesn't want to negotiate. So I think this has been something that's very inspired by their draft system. When you draft players, you have the ability to have three guys on your board at a time. And every week that you have them on there during the signing period, they gain interest. And so free agency taking that same concept and adding it there is awesome. Additionally, there's also a big board of the top 150, I think, free agents that are available. This is a very nice touch as well. I think it's just a little bit more immersive. It puts all the players in one place, and you can not just overall grades, but you can also see how age, potential,
Mhm.
overall positions even impact where those players are ranked on the board. So overall, those are some great changes to that free agent system, and it's been very fun to play with so far. I will note that it takes longer to get through free agency, and there's a couple quality of life changes that I'd like to talk with you about as we go on. But so far, so good.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about quality of life stuff too, because with a mode like franchise, the nitty gritty matters and the pace matters. But before we get to that, have you learned anything in this 10 or so day period of having the game? I don't know if you had early access or not, but have you learned any like must do's or definitely don't do thises in free agency? Like, what are the best tips you can give for people to get their free agents or not screw up a free agency?
Wow, yeah. I'd say this is kind of putting me on the spot in a sense because I have only done one rebuild at the time of
Okay.
this recording. I've been so busy with
So
everything.
so that's a good question. Then what have you learned through one playthrough? Like can somebody glean enough through one free agency to get better at it?
It's a great question. I think, in my perspective, from my one free agency, I noticed that while you don't want to lowball guys, you can certainly keep players on your board, and you always want to have a full board at all times. Even if you're just going after one guy, it does not hurt you to have more players on the board because, like I said earlier, they're going to gain that interest every single
Mhm.
week. So for example, I threw a guy on my board, just a backup kind of depth level pitcher. I think it was Austin Gomber. I had him on my board, my Moneyball rebuild on YouTube for 4 or 5 weeks. Didn't know if I was going to sign him, but I managed to get him on a pretty low deal because I kept him there for like 7 or 8 weeks, and he eventually signed for way less than he would have otherwise because he was there for a long time. Nobody signed him. I sent him a low ball, and he eventually decided to sign for it was like a 50% chance, the lowest that you could get.
Hmm.
But he eventually decided to sign. So I learned, okay, so just having someone on your board doesn't hurt. There's no reason to not have all those slots filled in free agency. And the one thing that I do like specifically related to that is when I offered him a contract, you can't just offer him whatever you want, right? Because as that contract goes down, the interest that you've gained, or the motivation is what it's called, to sign also decreases. So you can only go below a certain threshold, below the market value. So no longer can you have someone on the board and say, at least from what I've seen so far, you can't have someone on the board for 8, 9, 10 weeks, decide to offer them 750K because nobody else signs them, and then cheese the system.
Interesting.
So that's definitely a lot easier, but you can't cheese it as much. So keep a full board, and you can get guys at sort of a discount, but not an unrealistic target.
Yeah, and that's great advice, I think, for people who are doing like the true rebuilds of let's turn the Pirates into a winner. Let's turn the Rays who don't spend money into it. Like, let's not that the Rays don't win, they win, but you know what I mean.
I get
You
it.
keep a guy on your board, and maybe you do get that low deal that you wouldn't get otherwise, especially with, at least so they say. Again, I haven't played the mode myself, but the big market teams are going to get the big fish, and the little market teams are not. So keep guys on your board. You never know. Um, in terms of quality of life stuff, you talked about that before. Um, what can be done? What can make the pacing better? Because they do want that realism, but at the same time, you want to see how your team does in season. You don't want to spend hours upon hours in free agency.
This is something that I wrote a whole thread on X. I could talk about this for literally the duration of the podcast. So I'll keep it short. There used to be a stat wheel. I've never played Diamond Dynasty in my life. I don't know if the stat wheel's in there,
There
but
is a
usually
stat
it'll.
wheel.
There is. Okay,
It's
so you know
currently
what the stat
bugged,
wheel
but
is.
there is a stat wheel.
Perfect. So they took that away for some reason on most screens.
Hmm.
So when you open your roster, you used to be able to see this pitcher has this walks per nine, which at least through offline sim is probably the most important stat for a pitcher.
Okay,
So
interesting. Didn't realize
you
that.
just, yeah, it's crazy. Like guys will have a walks per nine of 85, and if they're a 75 overall, they'll still put up a 3 ERA with a whip of 1.1.
Hmm.
So
Good to
anyways,
know.
that's a random segue. The stat wheel was kind of taken away on several menus. The free agency menu is one of these, and also is just the general roster. So it's hard to kind of gauge how guys are developing um, without the stat wheel.
Okay.
So it's still on the draft screen, which shows me that it's still very much in the mode. But for some reason, they took that away. And that has been something that, talking to other hardcore franchise players, they want it back because, like I said, when you see not all 70 overall players are the same prospects that are coming up to the show. A guy with 80 contact versus right and 80 contact versus left, even if his fielding is terrible, fielding doesn't really matter through sim at all,
Oh,
from what I've seen. So you're going to weigh that over somebody who has a 60 contact, who's going to hit, 210, just because contact is so important. So
hmm.
having the stat wheel back would make a huge difference, especially in free agency, where you're not only looking at age, overall potential, but also you're looking for specific traits to fill your team.
I find that so interesting that they removed that from some screens because um, there was clearly an emphasis, at least in Diamond Dynasty, but I had assumed that was game wide, in giving us more information. Like there is more information in Diamond Dynasty than I've ever seen. You could see pitch analysis, what percentage of your opponent's pitches have been fastballs, have been strike, like more stuff than we've ever had at our fingertips before. The attribute wheel is just kind of one of those cornerstone things that you almost take for granted. So that is interesting to me that they opted to remove it for, I'm assuming they put something else in its place or at least changed up the screen, but that's still very strange to me.
They kind of did, but at the same time, like if you look at the free agent menu, there's this whole void in the top right. And this is what drives me crazy
It's like it should have
because,
been there.
yeah, it should be there. I
Okay.
don't know if it's just a resource issue or what, but if you look at the, free agent screen, you will see, I'm looking at it right now. I prepared.
I like that.
You'll
I have
see
my lineup open. I don't know why we're not talking about DD, but I'm staring at my lineup.
you've got a player name, position, their asking price, and then like a couple of significant stats, which is a new thing that I like. So you can see their stats on the year, but you can't see their attributes at all.
Hmm.
So it just doesn't make any sense to me
Now, are
why that
you?
was removed.
This is an inconvenience, but are you able to hit triangle on the player and see the player card, or is that not even an option either?
You can still do that,
All right, but why
thankfully.
why should you have to if the wheel should be there? That's what I'm getting at. That's just like an extra step in the
Yes.
process. Yeah.
A lot of these quality of life changes seem like, okay, big deal franchise nut, like, play your very small piano and scream from a mountaintop that you need the stat wheel back. But at the same time, these things do make a difference. And I was talking to Ant Ortiz about this the other day, another big rebuild guy,
Mm-hmm.
the rebuild guy, I would say. There's also no player card switching from free agency. So you can press, triangle X or whatever the numbers are, letters,
Whatever the
Xbox.
Xbox buttons are, I
It's
don't know.
Y. It's Y. I
Yeah, that's
remember
what it is.
now.
There you go.
You can open up the stat menu, but you used to be able to use the triggers to toggle between free agents from that screen. You can't
Hmm.
do that anymore. So
That's
if I
silly.
want to,
Also,
yeah, if I'm looking for a guy who has 80 walks per nine, I can't just look at the stat wheel on the menu anymore. I have to click triangle to go in there. And I can't just press trigger to go through all the guys that have, go from player to player to look for that walks per nine value. I have to press Y, look at it, go back, go to another player, press Y. So that's 3 extra buttons for one action.
yeah, and that adds up. That's time. And we're talking about not speeding through the process because the reason the process is there is actually to slow you down a little bit and immerse yourself in free agency, but it shouldn't be cumbersome. It shouldn't be a task to get through.
Right. And I also I'll make the argument that while the free agent edition is awesome and I love it and I love the immersion, it takes one, maybe too long, but there are also significant pieces of immersion taken away to make that process happen as well. And the big example that I'm thinking of there is the contract options are now gone.
Mm.
We've been asking for this system to be expanded because before it used to be no option, player option, club option, or both. And we've been asking for them to essentially revamp this option system to make it more modern to today's standards, or I guess just in line with managerial operations. And to be honest, I'm not a huge expert on that, but I've seen people ask for an expanded system, but it's just completely gone now. You can only offer a 5-year, $30 million contract, and when it expires, the contract's done. No options.
That's very strange. Yeah, so one of the reasons I have not wanted to touch franchise in a while, and think about it. I mean, I think I'm a little older than you. I'm 32, but people my age and probably even people your age, when they were growing up and first playing a baseball game, there was nothing but franchise, or sometimes it was just called like season mode or whatever it was called. Um, and back then there were so many options for so many things that could be done. I joke about this, but let me set the damn hot dog prices. Like let me do everything. Um, so to take things away is not great, especially like fundamental contractual things that you could probably argue are involved in most contracts signed at the major league level.
Yeah.
Deferment might become like a sticky thing just because that's
How
confusing, I
do you
think, for people who are in the system.
Yeah, right. How do you manage that? Are you
Who
gonna
knows? Like, you could defer every
money
contract.
100 years past your, end franchise date? So
Yeah.
deferments would not. I would be interested in seeing like a 1 or 2 year deferment system.
Interesting.
But uh, I'd be interested in seeing a short term deferment system and seeing how that would work out. But you also, I don't think you can front or backload contracts anymore either. It's
It's
completely
evenly
linear.
distributed.
Yeah, unless
Yeah.
I'm totally missing something, but I'm staring at the screenshot I took in game, and when you actually make a contract offer, it is the motivation to sign, the years, and the per year contract value, which that's one thing they got sort of right. A lot of players, I'm not going to say all players because I load in and Vlad Jr. is still asking for sub $30 million a year. But
Mm-hmm.
pitchers, at the very least, it seems they've sort of gotten these market values more right. But the ability to not front or backload, like we can talk about deferments all we want, but they've taken away fundamental pieces of the contract system and the options and different loading styles that have been there for, I don't even know how long, a decade maybe.
Yeah. I don't want to get completely off the rails and get on a tangent, but do you also play out of the park? Because I think all of those things are part of
Yeah, they are.
like, yeah, like that. And I'm not saying, oh, just partner up with out of the park. A lot of people like to say that. That's not a possible outcome, but it's possible, is what I'm saying. It takes a lot of work, I'm sure, but it's not like it's an impossible feat. It's been done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, out of the park is so advanced and so in depth. Like, and the tough thing for me as a creator in that regard is I got to be careful with how I say this. The audience that I'm making videos for, um, they're even less intense about franchise than I am. I love to play out of the park casually. I
Mm-hmm.
love to manage a team. I'm a huge nerd. I'm super into that stuff. But also, while I offer these rebuilds in MLB The Show and I try to push the limits of what MLB The Show franchise is set up to do, I can't just transition myself to out of the park or expect my viewers to watch
Of course,
something that's super in depth because the show's presentation and graphics are just better and it's a more popular game.
for sure.
So I love Out of the Park as much as anybody. I've considered making videos on it, but if I look, the market just isn't there. So
Yeah. Uh, Before we talk completely about negative things, though we did kind of start rolling the ball a little bit into that, I wanted to get your opinion on how trading seems to be working, both in terms of CPU to CPU and the user with the CPU. I made a video, might have been a couple years ago at this point. Rest in peace, Whiteboard Wednesday. OG viewers of the channel know Whiteboard Wednesday. Of like I simmed a franchise season. I had no physical involvement in it myself other than simming it, just to go through the transaction log and see every single trade the CPU made with itself. And my goodness, these were some of the stupidest things I've ever seen. So is trading better? Does it still suck? What's your opinion?
it's not better at all.
Okay.
And I was optimistic about this. I have not noticed any differences. And I don't know if it was actually said by them, but there was rumblings that trade logic was going to be improved, and it was extremely vague. And I think I wrote, this in one of my threads about the new features that were coming to franchise mode. I said trade logic's improved allegedly, and on launch day there were people saying no, it's not. It's terrible. And
Yeah. I mean,
um
I think they had alluded to like it being harder to dump big contracts and there will be more players you would consider untouchable. Like the Orioles are never trading well, not never, but they're not trading Gunnar Henderson until it's the trade deadline of his walk year, I would say. At the best case or the worst case, depending on how you look at it. But players like that should not be involved in trades. Not in the franchise system. At least not early in their careers.
absolutely.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I'd like to see like different storylines for players and using morale. as trade leverage on both sides.
That makes
For
sense.
example,
It's a good idea.
the Juan Soto deal a few years back. I mean, people at the time would have said, you know, the Nationals uh, were competitive with Juan Soto for a time, um, and they probably didn't expect him to walk. They would have expected him to sign an extension, or at the very least, not be traded
Mhm.
as early as he was. I mean, I think he had 2 years of arbitration when he got moved to San Diego, and that was a blockbuster deal. So I would like to see storylines where morale affects it for one, but also um, teams that are rebuilding or in that rebuilding stage being more willing to move on from those contracts while those players have value, especially in arbitration. So as far as logic goes, being able to add multiple trade spots, I mean, for the same reason as the Juan Soto trade working, I think is C.J. Abrams, James Wood, Mackenzie Gore,
Robert Hassel.
Robert Hassel. That was a massive, massive
Yeah.
deal. So, as far as just adding more trade slots, that would help make those blockbuster trades seem more realistic because
Mhm.
even it seems like if for a player like Juan Soto, 3 years of arbitration left and super young, whatever it may be, just kind of spitballing scenarios, three players oftentimes is not going to get that deal done. And trade logic is such a touchy thing because of the fact that there is always a negotiation factor in the real world scenario. Like
Mhm.
using the same Juan Soto trade, what would another team have given up?
Yeah.
We saw even the difference a year later with the Yankees trade.
Yeah. There's for sure a human element to it. And then you have
Mm-hmm.
to factor in idiots like the Rockies who trade Nolan Jones for nothing. So,
Just completely like lateral,
yeah.
no gain move. Yeah.
So it's never going to be a perfect system, and I think anybody who's reasonable, and that's the crowd of people we're trying to talk to here, the reasonable folks.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as a perfect system, and they're not expecting it, but they are expecting more things to make sense than don't make sense. And I think that's an easy level to reach, at least theoretically. Obviously, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a developer, um, and logic is probably a very difficult thing in general to program an AI and intelligence into a game. But um, you
I'll
talked
kind of
about.
level with you. I don't know anything about any of that stuff
Oh, I know
either.
nothing.
So
Yeah. You talked about like a little bit of narrative stuff and morale being a potential swing factor. I wish franchise gave you more. What's the best way to put this? Just more like on the nose immersion. Like I want the owner of the team to step in and go, "Hey, I'm not happy with the month of May. You better perform better or something." Or I want to be able to go to the owner and be like, "Hey, can we get a raise in payroll? Can we get like an extra 10 mil
yeah,
this offseason?" Like, and those are just ownership relations. There could be relations everywhere. I'm not looking for like a story mode. That's a completely different animal, but just ways to feel like there's actual pressure on you or something like in college football dynasty, which I'm not a big college football dynasty head. I play it passively. I'm in a league with some buddies that is kind of still going on a little bit. If you suck in your dynasty, your school fires you. So I don't know if we want that in franchise per se, but like there are elements of pressure if you stink. Um, I don't
yeah.
know.
Well, there is like not to completely rebuttal.
I'm down
There
for
happens to
rebuttal.
be
I don't know
a
enough.
yeah. I will say there is a coach contract system, but
Okay.
again, it's not. That's a minor rebuttal, and everything else you said. Even that system, there's not enough on the nose immersion. You'll see even throughout the league. A superstar player gets traded. It's like a pop up on the screen with a million other pop ups.
Mm-hmm.
I saw like Bobby Witt Jr. get traded for a bag of chips
He should
not
not be
long ago.
traded ever.
Ever. Exactly. Um, just stuff like that where it's like, oh, okay, one of the league's biggest stars just got traded. Yeah, no big deal. Moving on.
The guy
But
who
what?
just signed an 11-year mega contract. Like
Yes.
those are the things that really bother me with franchise. Like I know you can turn CPU trading off. That kind of defeats the fluidity of a franchise, but at the same time, you're allowing them to do stupid things like that.
Yeah, turning the slider down even like doesn't make that much of a difference. I always have it around. I mean, it's a 0 to 100 scale. I usually put it on 10 or 15 just
Okay.
to minimize the chaos. But as far as tuning goes, we're talking about, Bobby Witt Jr.'s 11-year contract. The biggest thing that I've noticed is long contracts result in too much trade value being taken away from a player, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, at least. Especially because, we've seen players over the years, teams will trade for their contracts, especially big market teams, and they'll say, we'll figure it out. He's a good player.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll trade him again before that contract's over, et cetera, et cetera. But in franchise mode, Rafael Devers, and I think it was Yamamoto and Rafael Devers last year, for whatever reason, you could trade for them for pretty much nothing because they're signed to long contracts and they're
so
lower
weird.
overalls.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. And this is probably the biggest thing where I talk about logic. There needs to be some sort of better gauging the values of players. And that's a very hard thing to do, as we've talked about. Even, the MLB trade value, calculators, they're way off in their assumptions as well.
Especially because, all right, so let's say you have a 5-WAR player. Let's just use him as an example. A 5-WAR player is supremely valuable, probably to all right, so maybe he's a bad example. Let's scale that back. Let's say you have a 2-WAR player. 2-WAR player. That's a starting big leaguer. It's not a bad player. 2-WAR position player. That player might not have the same value to every team as some other teams because maybe that guy is just a power hitter. And some teams are supremely lacking power and some teams are not. So he's expendable versus sought after. There are a lot of scenarios that make baseball players very different than other baseball players. Maybe you're Miles Straw. Maybe you're a 2-WAR defensive wizard who can't hit a lick. That has value to some teams. So it's hard to properly assess that seesaw of what makes this player worth anybody's time and how much a team should trade for them. So I get why it's difficult. And I'm not trying to sit here and say logic should be the easiest thing in the world. But it would frustrate me to all end if I saw wacky stuff going on.
Yeah. And I also feel like just because we don't know about the logic doesn't mean we shouldn't be able to talk about what we see.
Oh, for sure.
Make these observations, So, because for example, somebody who's a 2-WAR defensive wizard, maybe a team needs a defensive wizard at that particular position because they don't have, X, Y, and Z covered. They have a power hitter in that spot. They have, they got Juan Soto out in the field and they want to DH him or whatever it might be. That value shouldn't be the same linearly across all teams because I feel like there's a team needs system in the trade finder, but from what I've seen, at least, this is not proven at all. This is just my observation. It seems like I can get the same amount for any player, and every player has the same value to every single team when I open the trade finder, regardless of whether they are loaded at the position, regardless of whether it is a position desert for them, whether it's a nightmare, whether they're rebuilding or contending. The amount that teams are willing to give up for players does not differ depending on their own needs, and that's a problem.
That should be the entire crux of how teams go after players. I mean, that's literally how they said they shaped free agency, where teams will not be interested in guys if they're stacked at a position, or a player won't be interested in you if you're stacked at his position. So all of these things said, how do you stay locked into a franchise? Especially, you've talked about adjusting sliders. We've talked about clearly shenanigans that go on. What makes you locked in? How do you get so immersed in it?
I mean, having a fun franchise for me, at the very least, is, I love these processes. I love taking a team and building the team up and doing the nitty gritty to get there. I diagnosed ADHD since I was a small child, and so much of that is just hyper fixating on these small micro ideas, and most of the time things that aren't super productive, and just hyper fixating on them and saying I'm going to do this. So even in college or whatever, should have been studying for exams or whatnot. And I was saying, I'm going to rebuild this team today. And all of a sudden I'm playing a 20-year franchise, drafting every single year, just trying to build an absolute super team. My therapy per se, super, in quotes, would be I would play franchise to unwind and just be offline, not be recording, and just make it as unrealistic as possible in the sense of not signing free agents left and right, but I would have like, 40 of the top 50 prospects in my system by year 12.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, I mean, it gets stale after year 10 or 12 or whatever of doing that. But it was always fun for me to have that team building aspect and to say, like, oh, hey, maybe in this Tigers rebuild or whatever, I could sign Juan Soto this time. Maybe I can pair him with this generational outfielder that I just signed and make the greatest outfield ever. I kind of create my own storylines in my own heads. And I will say there are tedious elements of doing this. Every offseason seems to take so much time. And for a lot of people that haven't played franchise, I can understand why sitting there and tendering contracts to 90 players in your organization every offseason is the biggest drag in the world, because I feel that. These rebuilds do not take like a short period of time for me to film. If they're an hour long, I probably spent 6 or 7 hours recording minimum.
Yeah, that's a commitment.
Yeah, it's a commitment to get those videos out and to start that franchise. It's not, I mean, I've never played Diamond Dynasty, so I guess I'll use Road to the Show. It's not the same as going in and playing your Road to the Show and you're simulating a good amount of the games or whatever. It is, you're hands on, you're making these roster moves. You're scouting every single week. You're trying to uncover gems. You're analyzing your current roster, figuring out the guys that need to go down to triple A, double A, single A, whatever it might be. Guys that are ready to come up to the show. What are we doing about our payroll? It's like, I love how many variables there are in franchise. I really nerd out over that stuff.
And there still should be more variables. Let me set the hot dog prices.
Let me set the goddamn hot dog prices.
Like, I don't think it's asking for a lot. I want to manage everything that has to do with the team. What are my ticket prices? Are we adding seats this year? Are there luxury boxes? Are they selling? What's the marketing look like? Can we get Aaron Judge to go do a commercial and get like some team interest boost? Like, there are cool things that you could do with making it like super, super management focused. And that's what I think it should be. I think it should be more management focused than actually playing or roster adjacent stuff, you know?
And like in trades, let me negotiate with other owners and try to, kind of like the recruiting system in college football 25, where you can hard sell, you can soft sell.
Mm-hmm.
I want every team to have a different interest level for every player that you trade for. So for example, Juan Soto, we're going to bring him back into this. He just signed a mega contract. They're not going to trade him. But Juan Soto a couple years ago, that interest did not look the same to every single team.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm trading a player, I'm putting them on the block. I want to be able to see a percentage of how interested each team is. And I'm making this up on the spot,
That'd
so
be
it
cool.
might be BS, but let's see where it goes. Just a hypothetical.
Yeah.
I want there to be a different interest percentage for every single team. And then I want to be able to negotiate with those owners and either raise their interest or lower those interests depending on how I sell that player. That would be the biggest change that I would make to improve trade logic, at least user to CPU within franchise mode.
I love that idea. I think that's super unique. I mean, it's probably a system that best works for those top end players or like walkier guys who are imminently available on trade blocks constantly. But yeah, that's the type of immersion it needs. And when we talk about all of this, like signing and trading, and I'm just curious for your own personal enjoyment, and maybe, your interests will not always align with others, but do you enjoy or which tier of team do you enjoy rebuilding the most? Do you like taking, I'm just going to use the Yankees. Do you want to blow them up and start from scratch? Do you like taking that middle of the road team like the Rays because they're competitive with a low payroll? Or do you like taking like a complete lost cause like the Marlins, who have seemingly no talent anywhere in the system, and just starting from scratch?
Let me tell you how I play franchise. It's very different than how many people do. And and better or worse, that makes my content unique. But let me walk through what my last video was.
Sure. And listen, if you're doing something different, it's for the better. It's not for the worse. I promise you that.
I appreciate hearing that, because sometimes I'm like, maybe I should just do it by the book. But whatever,
I mean,
I'm going to do it my way.
Quick little tangent. I want to hear what you have to say, but quick tangent. I have built pretty much my entire very small community, but loving community, and my entire channel on doing stuff that people were not doing in the community. Always do that. Always find your lane.
Like doing an MLB The Show podcast, for instance. I mean, that's a rare thing.
We're here.
I even searched for it on Spotify when I was recording. I was like, I wonder if anyone's done this. And sure enough, you've been doing it for years.
Yes, there are a couple others. I I'm stuck to the name at this point, the show, the podcast, because people within our community know it's MLB the show. So it's the show, the podcast. I thought it was funny
Right.
when I came up with it. Turns out it's a very unsearchable podcast name. So I
Oh man.
apologize for people who tried to search for it and can't find it. We exist clearly. Um, but yeah, that tangent. Back to what you were saying. I'd love to hear how are you rebuilding? What are you doing?
I love that tangent. Okay, so my last video, the Moneyball rebuild, and this is just going to show how psychotic to a degree I can be. People get my on-air personality, but they don't realize that I'm sitting here like plotting and scheming to be like, how can I make this Moneyball rebuild as hard as possible?
I like
So
that.
I set a payroll cap at $60 million for, the Moneyball A's. And I'm like, okay, so that's fine. I'll be able to rebuild through the draft, whatever. I won't be able to spend on pretty much any free agents that are going to be full value. So I'm going to have to find diamonds in the rough, low ball. But then I say, you know what? The Oakland Athletics, they just started spending money on players pretty recently. I don't know if that has to do with their move to Vegas and or their payroll penalties for not spending enough money.
I would say
Not
that
being
mounting pressure
Yeah.
from other owners is what I would say. Yes.
Yes. So, I'm like, they're just a little too good, right now. They extended Lawrence Butler and Brent Rooker. They just signed, I think it was Luis Severino, to the biggest contract in team history.
Yep.
So I said, they have some pieces here. Let's blow that up. And so I traded those players for at the beginning of the rebuild for pretty much nothing. Like there's a trade interest meter where it's like a little over here benefits you greatly. In the middle is just right. Over here is like you're benefiting them. That's where it was for pretty much all these guys. Mason Miller, Brent Rooker, Lawrence Butler. Traded them, started from scratch, rebuilt through the draft, signed some budget free agents. And that's not even close to the hardest rebuild I've done.
So,
Yes.
how do you judge the success of one? Is it as simple as I won the World Series at some point? Like, how do you judge the success of a rebuild?
There's certainly rebuilds that are more fun than others. I think. I mean, sometimes players will just pop off, I guess, from the team before. And I'm very interested in like creating my own universe and bringing in my own players and kind of doing it that way. So what's really satisfying is when I draft players and they come in and make a difference and they're not just supplementing the roster. Literally, they are the core. I guess the success would be like, winning the World Series, but I did a, expansion type franchise series with the Portland Pickles. They're like a summer league team out of Portland. Awesome franchise. And that's probably like my most beloved journey ever because that team pretty much the storyline of it was it started with no players 70 overall or higher. And I had to build that roster from scratch, also on a limited payroll. So signing guys that were not offered contracts in arbitration or not tenured contracts to come back, kind of like major league rejects, and then supplementing through the draft. And then I think we won the World Series in like season 8. So it was a long-term journey.
Pretty good, though. If you're taking it from a realistic lens, 8 years for an expansion team ain't bad.
Well, to go completely against the realism, I think we won like 132 games or something by season 10. Just
that's unrealistic. There you go.
God squad, yeah. And that's that sim engine's a whole different conversation.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So, how often do you find yourself playing the game, like the baseball game, or do you just sim all the stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get that a lot, actually. There's something called critical situations.
Yes, which I think is, again, I'm not a franchise guy. That's an incredible thing that they added to the game.
Yes,
last year, I think it was.
Yeah, I love being able to jump into games based on what the outcome is. Big situations, big moments. Sometimes I'll also just like, it's very rare that I play a full 9-inning game, just because of how many seasons there are in the video. If I showed a 9-inning game, one would take an hour to record each game. And that's just not my content style. It's kind of like using those critical situations to create storylines within my videos. And then also using the super sim feature to, kind of sim through playoff games faster, and you can still see how everybody's doing. It's a little less immersive, but you kind of have to pick and choose, whether it's worth spending 365 days on one 10-year franchise or putting out 20 rebuilds a year.
Yeah, it's a good point. So, March to October is kind of like the redheaded stepchild and streamlined version of franchise. What is your relationship to March to October, and what do you think its relationship should be to franchise, if any?
So I am actually completely out of touch on this because I have not opened March to October, yes, like in my entire life.
Good.
But
join the community of people who refuse to play it.
It kind of just seems like the training wheels, like compact version of franchise. It's kind of like franchise simplified and not as immersive. And
With critical moments that you cannot customize. It'll tell you, like, hey,
right.
you got to play this game. And sometimes it's the fourth inning, and sometimes it's the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs. So it's very inconsistent that way.
I get asked all the time. People like on TikToks will be like, "Is this March to October?" I'm like, I have never played that mode in my life.
Tell those people to play something else. No, I'm just kidding. Play the game in whatever way makes you happy. But when I look at like what is like superfluous in MLB The Show 25, and what can we cut because not as many people love it, March to October would probably be number one on that list.
My concern about March to October is specifically because that just means that they see franchise as too complicated for a lot of their base, probably especially younger
That's
players.
A good point.
I mean, I was forced to, dive in with my bare hands and, figure out franchise on my own when I was 7 or 8 years old, starting in Madden and NCAA Dynasty. And I mean, every sports game I play franchise.
Mm-hmm.
And so my concern with March to October is they're kind of holding your hand a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, when I was growing up, I was a super big fan of like the Pokemon games.
Of course, as you should be. Let me show you this real quick. Hold on, please hold.
Oh, really? Yeah, so I was a huge fan of the Pokemon games growing up, and there was like, Pokemon Emerald, which I felt like, oh wow, you have a full collection.
These are all my original copies. Wow. OG copies, wow. Baby.
So he knows what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Pokemon Emerald, I remember struggling, scratching and clawing as a kid to beat some of those gyms. I mean, there was this double battle one, like gym 6 or 7 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not get past that to save my life. And then, Pokemon Emerald was my childhood. When I turned like 12 or 13, they made remakes of that game.
Mm-hmm.
And so I played it and I was like, I hadn't touched this game in a while. Like, I shouldn't be good at this, but it's just holding your hand. And I feel like that's the franchise to March to October relationship in the analogy that I'll use, because in franchise, you have to tender all these contracts and understand how arbitration works and the Rule 5 draft. And, this is, we saw it with College Football 25 Dynasty. Dynasty has become the premier mode because you build your team and you recruit, and it's easy to navigate. Mm-hmm. Franchise and MLB The Show, because MLB is a little more complicated on an organizational level with all these different quirks. I think that SDS needs to do a better job of appealing to both, and this is so difficult, both people like me who love the immersion and want to do everything themselves, and people that are just in the training wheels phase and don't want to deal with all these features. I think even like having an option at the beginning to like remove the Rule 5 draft, or to simplify arbitration, or to auto offer contracts without switching it from manual to auto because it just doesn't work well. Just clicking one button where you can offer everybody a minimum contract would make it so much more easy for people to get into it, because attention spans these days sound like an old grandpa here, but it seems people don't want to spend time doing stuff that I do and offering contracts to everybody. And I can't blame them, because off seasons take up to 2 hours sometimes to get through.
Yeah.
So why don't we find a way to bridge the gap between beginners and seasoned vets to make this game mode as good as it can possibly be and as digestible as it can be?
I'm sure that's, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I would imagine that is what's maybe holding back some of these more advanced editions. I know the community at large has really been like, hey, international draft, international free agency. Let's get this stuff going. Let's get this in the game. That's a whole nother level of immersion. What if they find a way to have like post players from Japan? Like, I mean, that's a whole beast that is complicated and convoluted, and even adults who have been within baseball forever don't understand the intricacies of that system. But these are the things that diehards, like the baseball people, the franchise people, they want everything at their fingertips to make it seem like this is an MLB offseason. And I don't know how you satisfy both sides. It could be so simple as, hey, I don't understand the Rule 5 draft. Let's turn it off. That's a great idea. You should be able to toggle just about everything.
Yeah, it
You
should be
can't
fully
skip an off
customizable.
season. Yeah, you can't skip an off season. You got to do it. But like, let's just do the free agency window, like the major league free agents. Like, you should be able to customize it. I agree with you there.
And even to an extent, if players want to have a shorter season, that should be an option too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it could be really overwhelming to jump in and say, like, I need a scout every week. And people will be like, I drafted my players, but what happened? I'm like, well, did you remember to sign them? Which you have to do every 2 days. And they're like, how do I do that?
Yeah. I wonder if I always question this. And we know that Major League Baseball and the Players Association are very involved in MLB The Show.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, I don't know what they're involved in, but I know, like, holistically, they're very involved. I wonder if they wouldn't allow for, like, shortening of schedules, for instance, because you're then, like, eliminating games and exposure. And I know it's just a video game, and it sounds like I'm taking something way too serious and a step too far, but these are some of the things that, like, the lawyers with Major League Baseball would think about, or the players associations would think about. Like, you think I'm
That's a
grasping
really good point.
I'm not grasping at straws here, I don't think.
I mean, we don't even know the restrictions that they have on the managerial process. Like, are they allowed to remove the Rule 5 draft, or is that like a branded thing that needs to be in there? Like, how many options do they have to make it simpler for players that are new to the game? Because I cannot count how many times people comment on my videos and they're like, how do you do this in Diamond Dynasty? You know,
there is a considerable disconnect between the online and offline community. Clearly, I don't know as much about offline as I thought I did, or I should, but now I know more. Part of why I wanted to have you on was also to bridge that gap, at least in my community, because I have a very online focused community versus your offline franchise community.
yeah.
But there are people who, yeah, I mean, there are people who just like online, offline is stupid, and there are people like offline, online is stupid. I'm like, hey guys, what you don't realize is that a functioning game environment and a healthy game environment
we need both.
needs to have everything, and everything's got to be good. Like it's that simple.
There should not be subdivisions within this. I'm like, it almost sounds like this half of the room called this half of the room dumb, and it's like we're all on the same team. MLB The Show. Like, I'll get hate comments sometimes where it's like franchise is stupid. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going around and calling like what you do in Diamond Dynasty stupid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just a matter of, you know, this is what I enjoy to do, just like this is what you enjoy to do, and if different members of the audience watch different streamers, which everybody does. Everybody has their preferences. Not everybody is going to like my content. And I think it's the same thing for just about everybody. So I guess my goal is to introduce people to franchise as much as I can, and, you know, say, hey guys, this is what I like to do. This is a new approach that I have to do it. It's a little different than maybe you've seen. You know, come watch this video, and if you enjoy it, then stick around and watch more. But if you don't, then you don't ever have to watch franchise again. That's the great thing about the internet.
One of my biggest gripes with MLB The Show 24, and we're not going to make this an MLB The Show 24 shitfest. That game is in the past. Is that it had so little to do, not just in Diamond Dynasty, but in the whole game. So it lost my interest quicker than it ever has before. And that's not a statement I ever thought I'd say about an MLB The Show game. MLB The Show needs to have a fun, engaging road to the show, a fun, engaging franchise, a fun, engaging Diamond Dynasty. Because if you get bored doing one, you'll dip your toe in the other if you're just interested in a baseball fix. That's why I'm very happy so far with MLB The Show 25. Again, still acknowledging that online needs a little bit of work in terms of like connectivity and things like that. Diamond Quest, I understand that's within Diamond Dynasty, but it's an offline mode. In the sense that it's not head-to-head. Like, you still need an internet connection to get into Diamond Dynasty. But Diamond Quest... Sorry, go.
That's a question. Do you feel like Diamond Quest has kind of helped bridge that offline-online gap a little bit more?
I hope so, because it's so innovative. It's super smooth. Like, you can use your Diamond Dynasty team in, like, unique ways. It's a stub grinding method for people who care about that, so they've been abusing it, as I have. But I also think, like, it's shown people that there is value to having entertaining modes everywhere. I am enjoying MLB The Show 25 thoroughly, and I've played more offline stuff, or again, not head-to-head stuff, than I have in the longest time. And I'm having a blast. Like, a healthy game environment offers more than just one really good thing, is kind of what I'm getting at.
It sounds like, at least from my perspective, sets and seasons made a huge difference last year, and the lack of enjoyment in the game and just the staleness of it kind of affected that. So it seems the dev team did a really good job of trying to keep longer term interest, which is really great for every content creator. And having so many more options, like, allows people that, have unique spins on content where they're not just like, I'm playing this game mode, where people that make more, I think RGS is the biggest example of this that I can think of. People that make more kind of like arcadey, fun content that's innovative and unique. More game modes allow those people more ideas. So
Yes.
it's a win for everybody. It's a win for the people that want to play, Diamond Quest long term, the people that are going to play Diamond Dynasty throughout the year, and also for the content creators, because interest is there longer, and we don't need to worry as much about that slump in July, August as we had last year.
Yeah, I cannot believe it just dawned on me that this would be the most interesting question to ask you. Here we are at the end of end-ish of the podcast, but whatever, it's fine. Sets and seasons really did not affect you as an offline franchise, both creator and consumer. So what was your opinion on MLB The Show 23 and 24? Like, do you understand? And I don't mean you're not an idiot, but like, do you understand why everyone hated them, or are you just like, hey, not my problem?
I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I hate to use this word, but this is my business. My business
Sure.
is to make MLB The Show videos. So I'm definitely concerned about, like, factors that have contributed to, lack of interest overall in the people that want to watch my videos. So I honestly didn't know what a set or a season was until like July last year.
You missed
Had
nothing.
no
I
idea.
promise. It was awful.
And then I talked to some friends that I've played more Diamond Dynasty content, and they kind of explained to me, how the whole system worked. And I was like, wow, that's messed up.
It theoretically, like, again, I will still, like, I give them respect for trying something new, something drastically different. I think in a different ultimate team mode or a different sport, it might work different. Like, MLB The Show people are just so preconditioned to a certain type of style of content being rolled out that this was such a drastic shift.
Yeah, it sounds like it was absolutely detrimental to the success of last year's game. And there were a lot of questions that people had. I mean, at least I felt like in the 3 years that I've been making content on this game, the MLB The Show 25 release and all the hype leading up to it was far more vital than ever. It almost felt like we were waiting for answers more than we ever have, because it wasn't like in the past where you knew kind of what game you were going to get. We all knew that there were big changes coming. And, to answer the other part of your question, how did it affect me in MLB The Show 23, 24? I liked MLB The Show 23. Maybe that's just nostalgia from it being my first game.
Sure. I have the same type of opinion on 20 and 21.
Maybe MLB The Show 24, the big thing that messed with me was, one, the only thing that I think was added was critical situations. And that might have even been added a year before. I think it was last year, though.
I think it was last year.
Yeah, that was a big thing that was added. But I opened up the game for the first time, and I saw that this is so nitpicky. I saw the light mode theme.
Oh, like, it was like a flashbang went off in your living room.
Like, this is going to be a long year, man.
Yeah.
It's going to be a long year of eye strain. Like, I still have to go to the doctor and get my prescription re-upped. I think because of that game, spending, 2,000 hours playing franchise mode.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I'm glad it's gone. I don't even know if I'd call the current mode a dark mode. It's a darker mode. But, like, the more subtle, not in your face look, much appreciated, SDS. Thank you for pivoting away from that. Also, we could probably program in a dark and light mode if we really wanted to. Like, I'm sure we could toggle that on and off.
Maybe what's stopping them? Just hypothetically, what's stopping them?
I don't know. I don't know how coding works.
That's all these offline changes are, especially, is just like all hypothetical. Because we can go on a tangent of like, okay, but we need these immersive things, but we also need it to be less immersive so people can get into it. So where do you draw the line, and how do you make everyone happy? How do you
Yeah.
make the, I know, people that are, 40, 50 years old, middle class, blue collar employees that play this game every night after work.
Hmm.
And I also know young kids that play this game every day after school. And I guess in a perfect world for me, based on the changes that we've already gone in pretty deep about, how can we nail the quality of life, nail the features, and nail the presentation in a way that will be both efficient and customizable to keep everybody happy and engaged in the same mode?
Yeah. So I guess my closing question or our closing topic would be, because we've touched so many different aspects of franchise. The big conversation this year with the changes was, okay, this looks like they've laid the new foundation for actual tangible changes in years to come. It lacked the foundation in previous years, at least with the free
Mm-hmm.
agent logic. Do you think
Yeah,
that's true? Do you think that they laid the foundation? And what would be like the one next thing you'd like to see them do?
I absolutely think the foundation has been laid in a step in the right direction
Yeah,
because
it's
we saw
better than it
big
was.
changes.
Yeah.
Yes, we've seen big changes to Road to the Show this year that have me very optimistic about what franchise can be based on one, their ability to take feedback,
Mhm.
to add in new innovative modes. And I feel like next year will be the year for franchise that they put more eggs into that basket because there's been minor tweaks along the way. I think the new free agent system is a nice revamp, but it's not the same level of innovation as the scouting system that they adopted 3 years ago or
Mhm.
2 years ago. Um, so for me, I would like to see, um, as the next step, one, bringing back the things into the game that they took away for some reason, the stat wheel,
Mhm.
bringing back contract options. Those are all things that seems like, at least to me, I don't know anything about coding, but it feels like it's a patch away from being back.
They could, for all we know, and I don't know anything, but for all we know, they could patch the attribute thing tomorrow, and it could have been a bug this whole time. Let's
Yeah,
hope
you
that's
never
the
know.
case.
I'm going to stay optimistic about that, but I truly am having a better time playing franchise mode than I had last year. I mean,
Okay.
we'll throw away the light mode presentation. I think the trade logic's still the same. That's going to need to probably be a next year new game release update. I'm not sure what they can really do about that now. But I'd like to see contract options come back. I mean, I've seen Madden add contract options in mid-year.
Mhm.
I think they add fifth-year options like halfway through the cycle. I don't think there's any reason for MLB The Show to not bring it back, which is especially because it's been in the game many years before
Yes.
this. So just bring back those traits that we've been missing and those quality of life changes. Using the triggers to go through the free agents like would make such a big difference. Just minimal things like that, tune it up, and then we can talk about major changes for next year after that. But get the things back in the game that made it so good and continue to build on the positive change of actually adding that revamped free agent menu.
Awesome. Yeah. They made an emphasis of doing quality of life stuff in Diamond Dynasty this year, so I hope that extends in the future to our friends who play the other game modes, because everyone deserves to have a good quality of life. Um, but we have reached our conclusion. So I hope everybody who's a ride or die Diamond Dynasty player has learned some more about franchise, maybe is considering starting up a franchise of their own. Um, Again, just because now it's been about an hour since you plugged yourself, where can the people find you? Do you have a stream or YouTube schedule? Like, what's your MO?
I basically post 2 times a week on YouTube right now. I try to
Okay.
do as much as I can, and I make more than just franchise content as well. I like to make Road to the Show, just creating like different funny characters. Like I made like Livy Dunn and like Big Justice, and like I think I made Donald Trump like the day after he got like elected or whatever. So like I make fun characters and Road to the Show. I made a terrifying MLB The Show character. Like to do that type of stuff just for the memes. Um, I did of course, my Moneyball rebuild, and then more recently, I did a March Madness, but an MLB The Show tournament style video.
Okay.
Some of that more fun arcadey stuff. So I just want to thank you guys all for listening to me. I hope that you guys are having a good time with Diamond Dynasty this year, and I'm optimistic that at some point I'll be able to dive into that too and see why you guys enjoy it as much as you do. And I hope that everybody keeps enjoying the show, the podcast, because
Hell yeah.
This is some great stuff. Plug that.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Scrawny Slugger, for being a guest and enlightening us all on franchise. Truly hope you guys made it to the end of this episode. This was a good one. More content, of course, coming this week. We've got a video tomorrow, Wednesday. Little sweaty battle royale run talking about Diamond Dynasty. Then Thursday, we've got a how to pitch with video. And then Friday, we got an in-game manager. We are on 5 uploads a week cadence for the foreseeable future. Oh, I'm a working man. It's a lot, but it's fun. I enjoy it. So thank you guys for being here. Like, subscribe, of course, if you have not done so. And stay tuned for more content. Love you guys. See you next time.